Hey, how are we doing out there, guys? So we're going to kind of expand. So obviously, my last video on basic battle tactics, I talked about the holding attack. So the holding attack is a pretty simple definition. It's basically there's essentially two really easy ways to think of it. Excuse me. A holding attack kind of serves one of two main purposes. So one, we attack an enemy position or an enemy concentration or something like that in order to force them to leave a significant number or all of their forces in place to deal with this attack. That way I can then envelop or outflank or in some way use a different element. Maybe it's a hypermobile element, whatever it is, to go attack something else, right? The reason is like, hey, because I attacked you here and it was a legitimate attack, or because I faked that attack so well, you couldn't risk sending too many people away lest I break through in that area. Or there's the opposite of that. So if I have, maybe a part of my force is exposed in some way, vulnerable to attack in some way, or enemies maybe already attacking them, I launch an attack somewhere else to force an enemy to commit some forces, to commit some supplies, to commit effort to that spot, so that they either can't, attack my other unit, or so that attack is weakened. So it's kind of, and I talked about how two like standard ways that we do that would be like a feint and a demonstration. So a feint it's a fake attack, but like we physically attack the enemy. A demonstration, in classical terms, is more like you obviously like you basically you kind of just put on a show in front of an enemy. In the modern sense, it's a little bit harder to think of that, but one way you could think of it is, it's kind of comparable to, we don't actually know yet for certain if Russia is going to attack Ukraine from Belarus again. I've talked about that in some of my other videos where, militarily for Russia, it makes all the sense in the world to do it from there. Now, that Belarus would join in makes less sense for Belarus. But for Russia, it also serves a big purpose, just building up men and material and things up there, because the Ukrainians are forced to respect that. So they have to keep some amount of units, north of Kyiv to basically to be there in the event that does happen. They have to treat it like it's a real possibility. So so we're talking about the example from history that we're going to use. We're going to talk about the German Spring Offensive of 1918, sometimes called Kaiserschlacht, sometimes called the Ludendorff Offensive. So obviously 1918, Western Front of World War One. So a little bit about the situation. So obviously this is the spring of 1918. So the Germans have knocked the Russian Empire out of the war, and then signed, or are about to sign the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, which gives them a whole bunch of territory and stuff over there. But what it also means is that now they have a fairly minimal commitment in the east. They're able to free up numerous divisions of their own, send them to the west. So now the Germans have something like 3.5 million men in the west, which means they outnumber the Entente, in the west. It also means that, now they're able to, because they have additional men that are available for offensive actions, it also means that now they can rotate units back to get training on what's going to be their new, attacking style, the tactic of infiltration with stormtroopers or Stoßtruppen, and kind of introduce this. And it had been around in World War One, but the Germans are basically, they're the first people to use it on a large, basically doctrinal scale, as far as World War One goes. And so then other things that happened. So in 1917, and this is actually very well done if you've seen the movie 1917. I think it's a very good movie. But so there's Unternehmen Albrecht, or Operation Albrecht, which is where the Germans basically abandoned the Noyon salient, which is essentially a lot of territory, like kind of in like this area over here. So they basically shorten their line. They fall back to better like territorial positions. They set up much more advanced and in-depth defensive lines. And because they shortened their front up, it also means that now they can control their front with fewer divisions, which means now they have more additional, manpower available to send them back for training, to rest and refit, and available for offensive actions in the future. So that's a very big deal. So now what we're also talking about is, so in April of 1917, America declared war on the German Empire. Was that April 7th? Someone's going to correct me on that. Anyways, in April America declared war on the German Empire. So America's going through all of the beginnings, well, not by 1918, but in 1917, they're going through all the beginnings of conscription and all of that. And by the spring of 1918, large numbers of Americans are starting to arrive in France. And so the Germans basically are put in a position where they know that, obviously their manpower position is just getting worse and worse. Same thing with France, same thing with Britain. But the Americans, were basically fresh. So they know that the longer the war goes on, and if they allow America to get into France in force, they basically can't win. So they're like, hey, we need to launch some sort of offensive that allows us to bring the conflict to a close before America is in France in force. And then maybe we can end it on terms that are still favorable to us. So they basically plan for this massive, spring offensive that they're going to start. So, and like I said, one thing that I think is interesting, is most military campaigns or battles or whatever. It's rare that there's only like one quote unquote battle tactic present. And I think I'm a World War I nerd, but the spring offensive I think is really cool because there's a whole bunch of different things present. At the tactical, the operational, and the strategic level. So it's probably one of the single best examples of an operational level and a strategic level progressive attack. So it's definitely a progressive attack as far as that goes. Multiple attacks can be considered holding attacks, obviously, because I'm doing a video on that. But they are themselves completely serious, legitimate attacks as well. So they're not feints. As well as multiple attempted, envelopments and things like that. So I think it's really interesting, stuff because the plan is so humongous in scale compared to basically everything that had been going on in the previous couple of years of World War I that it caught everybody off guard, as far as what their actual plan was. So what will kind of, again, I'll kind of keep my usual, I'll try to be, pretty detailed, but without getting down into the exact days and minutes and stuff like that, because that's a little bit outside of my realm. But what we'll start with is, so the Germans begin the spring offensive with Operation Michael, Unternehmen Michael, on March the 21st. So on March the 21st, and so again, and like I said, I like this man. I don't know, I just Google stuff and find images I like. So this solid purple line represents where the front line was at the start of the operation. So I guess things of note is that famously the Belgians still controlled what they call the Ypres salient, so around the town of Ypres here. So they basically managed to control a very small swath of territory, which for them was like a big morale, like a propaganda kind of thing, on that. So the Germans basically begin, Operation Michael on March the 21st, and it is centered in this area here. So what they're basically attacking towards, and now this was a major criticism of Ludendorff, is that he had numerous large-scale offensives planned, but without one very specific, coherent strategy, and wasted what was an incredibly good opportunity that they had. But so the basics of the German attack in Operation Michael here was, one, they wanted to split the French and the British armies from each other. So the French and the British, they basically connect more or less, kind of in this area here. So they want to split the British and the French from each other. And now the British are entirely reliant on, obviously, getting things to the ports. So obviously we can see that, the ports in Belgium are under German control. So you have Calais, Boulogne, Dieppe, places like that. They're entirely reliant on the channel ports. This is one of the main reasons why Ypres is such a famous name and why it was fought over so much in Flanders, was because the British needed to protect it and to keep the Germans away from it, and the Germans wanted to take the short route, which was to go from here to here and cut off channel ports, which basically would have choked the British. The British would have had to, they would have had to retreat, and they can't retreat towards Paris because their entire supply line is from the coast there. So they attack here, and what they're aiming for, generally speaking, is Amiens here. So this was the single major logistics hub for the British. And as we can see, kind of obviously why. One, it's along the Somme River, but, as you can see, it's basically between the lines, and, Dieppe and Boulogne and places like that. And I'll flash over to my map, like my actual Google Earth map here in a minute, and talk about it. So major logistics hub. Now, the Germans advanced a ton in this area. A couple reasons is one, they had come up with very good tactics, as far as, so they had an artillery tactic called the Feuerwaltz, the fire waltz, which is basically a method of how they attack. So it's basically it's a progressive and it's a planned attack. So the attack begins with, attacking communication centers, logistics centers, stuff like that. Then it shifts to the front line, attacks front line positions, other positions. Then it shifts back to the artillery, suppresses the enemy artillery, and then it becomes a creeping barrage. Then it goes through there. But it's a very well, orchestrated, very well planned, artillery tactic that they use. As well as if you guys are remotely familiar with World War I, Cambrai, Peronne, San Quentin, places like that. These are all the areas that were fought over in 1916 in the Battle of the Somme. So it is just absolutely, completely wrecked. So it's very difficult territory to hold. But also conversely, for the British, this is territory that doesn't really matter, just in the sense of the actual ground itself. So the places that matter the least are defended the least effectively, whereas the places that matter the most are obviously going to have better defenses set in place. But so the Germans are very effective, and they push back, obviously right up to the gates of Amiens, basically. And they split multiple British armies. They split the British from the French, and as you see, you start to push this salient through. And this becomes a very big deal when you talk about having allied armies that are fighting together. Because one thing that it's hard to kind of wrap your brain around sometimes is that the British and the French were allies, and obviously the British line married up right with the French line, but one, obviously they're under different, commanders from their own countries. They do have an overall commander. It's Foch at this time. Now, the other thing as well is that all of the French logistics, supply lines, and everything are to the south. So this is Paris, so south of this. Whereas the British, it's all north and northwest of this, which means if you split them and they have to retreat, both of them have to retreat in opposite directions because that's where their, basically, quote unquote, their home base is. So it's a very big deal. So now, this attack, it peters out before Amiens. Doesn't quite make it. It basically peters out on April the 5th. So we're on for 2 weeks, highly effective, does not quite take Amiens. The Germans immediately launch what's called Operation Georgette, which was originally supposed to be Operation George, but they had to scale it back. A little bit. And so, Georgette is also called the Battle of Lys. There's the Lys rivers up in here. So as you can see, so the Germans basically attack from here towards the Ypres salient, but they attack towards a town called Hasbrook, however you say that. So, towards Hasbrook, because I'll flash over to my map so we can talk about this stuff here in a minute. But this is at this time, it's a major center of rail activity. But you also kind of see is that it is directly lined up from Calais and Boulogne, from the coast. So obviously, particularly at this time, rail lines, it's not like there's just, 1,000 rail lines going anywhere you want at any given time. They tend to go to hubs, and then hubs tend to take you in one or maybe a double line to some other hub and then out from there. So the Germans attack towards Hasbrook because what they want to do is they want to deepen this Ypres salient. Because as the Ypres salient gets deeper, what they want to do is they're trying to force their way through Hasbrook and towards Calais and Boulogne. And they want to force the British and the Belgians to pull back from Ypres. If they can get them to pull back from here, they can drive them out of Flanders entirely, and they can start to cut the Channel ports off. So now, they're very effective. They cause, they take back over the Messines Ridge. They cause a lot of damage, but the British, the Empire is basically able to bring in, some Australians and some New Zealanders and things like that, and they famously fight the Battle of Hasbrook. And hold the Germans there. So Georgette goes from April 9th to the 29th. And then there's kind of a lull. So there's a lull, and then the Germans start what's called Operation Blücher-York. So Blücher-York is basically starts from about here, and it's this section, as you can see, that's kind of extended here. So what the Germans are trying to do is they're trying to extend this breakthrough and this territory that they got, so this is from Operation Michael. So what they're trying to do is they're also trying to widen the split between the British and the French here. And what they're trying to do with this is they're trying to suck more and more French units away to the south, and they're trying to suck British units away from the north. So again, you could consider this a holding attack, in some, definitions of it, because obviously, so the Germans had just attacked here in force and had very, very nearly been successful, but weren't quite successful. So then, the British bring reserves up and things like that. So then next, the Germans attack here. And what they want to do is they want to, A, keep British and French units that are already there from being able to be sent elsewhere. And they want to suck in reserves from somewhere else around here so they can resume this offensive up here. It's actually one of the things that Ludendorff does poorly. And, he was criticized for a lot of... Ludendorff seems to have been incredibly effective when he was paired directly with Hindenburg, because they each had some differing personality traits that seemed to work very well with each other, but Ludendorff alone seemed to not be that high of a performer, at least at the humongous operational strategic level. Anyways, so he kind of messes up by, they obviously have a very big tactical success of driving through, pushing the French back here, kind of between, Soissons and Rheims, up to Chateau Thierry. Obviously the Marine Corps famously fights, the battles around Chateau Thierry, Soissons, then also, Belleau Wood, which starts on June the 6th, which is when that's basically when the counterattack begins. And so Blücher-York runs from May 27th to about June 6th, so runs for, a week and a half there or so, as they're driving through there. So now, then additionally, as they drive through here, then the Germans launch an additional offensive basically a couple days later called Gneisenau, so Operation Gneisenau. So Gneisenau basically is an attack that's essentially, it's basically just trying to extend what the advances were from, Blücher-York, and nothing really happens with it. It was one of those where they attacked very well prepared French positions, and intelligence would give away that they're going to attack. So literally, Gneisenau only goes on for from June the 8th to the 12th, so only for a couple of days. Then later in July, the Germans launched what will be their last offensive, which is called, the Friedensturm, which basically means the peace assault, which doesn't translate super well to English. But they basically launch it in this area here between, Reims and Verdun. And again, the idea is still to try to basically suck more French or British units. I mean, this is obviously a French part of the line, but to try to suck more and more French and British units north, because they still are trying to create the situation, the criteria where they could make this offensive work, because they came so close that they kind of felt the need to, kind of sell out on that. And, you can't, it's hard to blame them, at least from the commander level. Now, as per usual, it's the mud cruncher that suffers from that, and as a former mud cruncher, I know where my place would have been during all of these things. It would have been with my feet soaking wet, sitting in some freaking ditch that we just dug. But I'm gonna flash over to my map. Possibly. There we go. Just so we can look at a little bit of the territory. Now, obviously, this is 2023, so the map looks different. But what you typically see with this is that places that were well-developed logistical, hubs in their time tend to still be well-developed logistical hubs now. They're just more developed than they were at the time. So, again, so if you remember what we're kind of looking at, so the extent of the German offensive basically was kind of culminated around Reims, however you say that in French. I don't know. I say it as an American. So then the Germans had advanced past that. So they're up very near Soissons. They were up to Chateau Thierry here. They advanced just to the outskirts of Amiens here. So if we flash in, zoom into Amiens, we can see, so it sits right on the Somme River. And I pulled it up so that it only shows some of the major roads, because I hate when you zoom in and it shows 5 bajillion freaking roads. But we can zoom in and you can see Amiens has just a ton of roads coming. Obviously, it sits right on a river. You can see a bunch of rail and stuff like that coming off there. So, it's, obviously a logistical hub. But then you can also see the main roads going away from it go right past Abbeville. And, man, I freaking hate this thing sometimes. And it comes right up to the coast here. So, comes up to coastal road. So you got, Boulogne and, Calais up there. Okay, so we can also see, so like I said, the salient, so the Belgians retained this very small section of Belgium throughout the war in what was called the Ypres salient. So the Germans attacked here, and then you can see Hasbrook here. So you can see that's a pretty decent amount of, so we look at our scale. So this is about 20 miles. So this is about a 20-mile salient the Germans are trying to push through to Hasbrook. And so we can obviously see the roads that run right past here go like straight to Calais. And so even now, you can still look and you can see that, Hasbrook has multiple rail lines, one, that runs straight through it, but also additional ones that basically connect right outside of it. And as you can see where these rail lines go, basically it runs straight back through here over to, all those towns are super French sounding, so I'm not going to try all of them. Screw it, let's try it. Like Arques, Saint-Omer, Longines, whatever, and hook back up, and it basically runs itself right back over to Calais, and then and also to Boulogne. So that's why that was so important for them, to try to take, because then you also have Dunkirk up here, obviously famous from World War II. But so trying to cut those channel ports off was was the main. That was basically what the Germans were trying to do against the British Empire in Flanders the entire war, at the various times when they had done. Assaults that were anything other than just like, kind of positional battles. I'll zoom out a little bit again here. So we kind of get back down to, so here's Amiens for us over here. There we go. Zoom out just a smidge. So as we can see, and this is largely the area that was fought over, during the Somme offensive. So Saint-Quentin, zoom in a smidge here. Yeah, so the Noyon salient, obviously named for that. So, Péronne, Bapaume, like all those places very famous from the Battle of the Somme. So you can also kind of see, like, territorially what you're dealing with is, so you get into, like, very, wooded territory and stuff around here, and then you get into the drainage of the Somme River, which kind of runs through, like, all of this. So that's the territory that the Germans were attempting to take over at the time, which was obviously very difficult for them. And again, so, kind of use that as an example, because like I said, I really like that example because it's probably the best example out there of a progressive attack, at the operational level, strategic level. But I like it because it's a very good, large-scale, real-world example of what a holding attack is and can be, which can be progressive in nature. So, it's easy to think of things in like linear terms when it's just like, hey, there's an enemy division there. Let's attack them a little bit while our cavalry rides around over here. And that works, obviously at certain times it's an easy way to think of, but then this is a good way to, to actually think of it in very, very, very large scale, terms in a very, very large war, which is that, attacking in a progressive nature, one, elicits responses from the enemy, brings in reinforcements from places, which makes them vulnerable to the next progressive assault, which means that your attacks can serve multiple purposes, which is that, one, they can in and of themselves be serious attacks, so obviously the, Operation Michael trying to attack Amiens. But so now, as they attack that, the British are forced to leave all the units that are in the area in place. They have to bring in reinforcements and other things like that. So now, because you're the Germans, and at this point you have a little bit of a numerical advantage because you just defeated the Russian Empire, now that allows you to attack, further north up here, in the Ypres salient, in an attempt to do the main thing that you want to do, which is to cut the British off from the coast, which would probably have forced them to retreat all the way to more southern ports and be evacuated from the continent proper, more than likely. So then when that didn't quite work, then you launch Blücher-York, which is basically to expand and basically to, in some ways, try to reignite Operation Michael again. Widen the split, draw more elements in there so that you can hopefully reignite the offensive around Ypres. And then you go, Operation Gneisenau, which is like a little bit smaller, like it's still kind of attempting to basically expand that. Doesn't quite work, so then you basically take one last offensive attempt, which is your Friedensturm, your peace assault, your peace attack, your peace offensive, which is basically trying to draw French units in, trying to draw the focus back up there. Because the other thing to keep in mind with this as well is that like during all of this, I don't have the exact numbers with me, but the Germans, while attacking basically from March until the end of July or the middle of July, managed to inflict more casualties than they suffered, which is ridiculous. Because we think of World War I in terms of, barbed wire machine guns and artillery and trench assaults and all those sort of things. So now, the fact that they inflicted massive casualties on the British and the French, it's kind of a testament to how effective they were. Now, this basically, it so completely weakened the German army that now there was no hope for, any sort of victory other than just the Allies deciding at some point that they might be done. The other thing that happened with it is what tends to happen, in elite, or more well-trained, higher echelon units, which is that because they are the initial part of your assaults and because they lead the attacks and things like that, is they tend to take pretty high casualties, not necessarily in number, but in percentage. Just because by the nature of, if you're the, German stormtroopers and you're the guys who sling your rifles on your back, are crawling and running across no man's land and clearing trenches with grenades, driving your way through the enemy artillery ahead of the main infantry, you're obviously in a position, where you're going to be in a lot of danger. Now, the danger becomes worth it when the assault works, and then the idea would be that, like, once you attack and you defeat the enemy tactically, you use the tactical victory to get some sort of operational victory, and then you basically rest and refit. You send the guys back to recover from injuries. You train more guys to fill the role. But the nature of doing these progressive attacks, basically unceasingly for months meant that, basically because the best of the German infantrymen had been, sort of creamed off of the top to become these stormtrooper units. Once they became casualties, once they became KIA and things like that, now given the strategic situation, there's basically nobody to replace them. And so then the 100 Days Offensive gets launched a little bit later in the summer, and then they basically just get slowly pushed back, until obviously, the armistice in November of 1918. But I thought that would be a good example, and one, again, I just think that I think the Kaiserschlacht, the German spring offensive, is just really interesting. But that's all I got, guys. Remember, only the hits count, and you can never miss fast enough to catch back up.